Now the unthinkable has happened. Ukraine is no longer just defending. It's attacking and taking back territories in a massive operation Putin never thought he'd ever see. In the last 72 hours, the world has watched a historic twist. Trump, who before was pressuring Kyiv to hand over parts of the country to Moscow, now declared to the whole world that Ukraine can and must recover every single inch of its land. Even more shocking, while Trump was making that revolutionary statement, NATO launched its biggest military operation since the alliance was founded. The codename? Eastern Sentinel, literally the guardian that protects Ukraine while its troops move forward to retake what has always been theirs. The promise Zelensky made to his people wasn't just nice words, it was a reconquest plan that is now in full motion. But get ready, because what you are about to find out in the next few minutes is going to shock you. On September 23, 2025, inside the elegant halls of the United Nations General Assembly in New York, a meeting took place that literally redefined the conflict in Eastern Europe. President Donald Trump, after meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, posted on his social network a statement that surprised analysts all around the world. He now believes Ukraine can retake all the territory lost to Russia. This change of position represents a complete turnaround in American diplomacy. But to understand the magnitude of this moment, we need to go back a few months. In August 2025, Trump had pressured Ukraine to hand over Crimea and to give up its campaign to join NATO during a tense one-hour meeting at the White House. During that earlier meeting, Zelensky said he had a long discussion with Trump over a map displayed in the Oval Office showing Ukrainian territories captured by the Russians, arguing about the percentages on the map because he knew those numbers very well. The transformation in Trump's position didn't happen by chance. Sources close to the negotiations reveal that Zelensky presented convincing strategic data and a detailed plan for territorial reconquest that impressed not only the American president, but the entire delegation present. The Ukrainian leader showed how his forces had been able to make significant advances even with limited resources, suggesting that with proper support, a complete recovery would not just be possible, but likely. Moscow didn't take long to respond to Trump's statements. The Kremlin warned that this American shift could lead the conflict to escalate into a third world war, using the harshest language seen in months. Russian spokesmen accused Washington of feeding dangerous illusions and promised unpredictable consequences if the United States steps up military support for Ukraine. Russian rhetoric reached levels not seen since the start of the conflict. Even more concerning were Moscow's claims that NATO is using Ukraine as a proxy in the fight against Russia. Russian officials argued that the real goal of the Atlantic Alliance is to weaken Russia militarily without putting NATO soldiers directly into combat, using Ukrainian land and lives for its own geopolitical purposes. This Russian narrative gained strength especially after NATO rolled out the Eastern Sentinel operation, which Moscow took as proof that the alliance was preparing for a direct confrontation. Russian analysts publicly argued that NATO has turned Ukraine into its human shield against Russia, an accusation Kyiv strongly denies, insisting that it is fighting for its own sovereignty and territorial integrity. As a direct response to growing Russian provocations, NATO launched in September 2025 one of the most ambitious security operations in the alliance's recent history. The Eastern Sentinel operation was created after Russia launched 21 drones against Poland, and it was modeled after the successful Baltic Sentry operation introduced in January 2025 to improve security in the Baltic Sea. The name, Eastern Sentinel, carries powerful symbolism. Like a sentinel that watches and protects, this operation literally represents the protective shield that Ukraine and its allies have raised against future Russian aggression. It's as if Ukraine itself has become the sentinel guarding the gates of democratic Europe. The operation is multi-domain, involving land, naval, and air forces designed to fill security gaps from the North Sea to the Black Sea, exclusively on NATO territory. During the drone incident, Polish and Dutch jets intercepted the unmanned aircraft with assistance from Italian, German, and multinational NATO forces. What makes this operation particularly significant is its rapid response capability. When 19 to 23 Russian drones entered Polish airspace on September 9, 2025, at 11:30 p.m., NATO's air defenses were activated immediately, successfully guaranteeing the defense of alliance territory. Military officials called the Polish airspace violation unprecedented, triggering a consultation by Warsaw with other NATO members. The Russian drone incident in Polish territory represented a crucial moment in the evolution of the conflict. Polish authorities confirmed that 19 Russian drones crossed from Belarus and Russia into Poland over 7 hours, a sign that the alliance as a whole had politically failed to convince Russia it would pay any price for that kind of incursion. This NATO airspace violation marked a red line that had never been crossed before. The military response was impressive in its coordination. A total of 16 drones were found throughout the country of Poland, with wreckage scattered across multiple locations. The interception operation demonstrated not only NATO's technical readiness, but also the alliance's political unity in responding to Russian provocations. Military experts point out that this incident represents a new phase in Russian strategy, testing NATO's response limits without fully crossing into direct confrontation. It's a form of drone diplomacy, causing just enough tension to influence political negotiations while keeping enough deniability to avoid massive retaliation. But the drones were only the beginning of a much bolder escalation. Just a week later, on September 19, 2025, 3 armed Russian MiG-31 fighter jets brazenly invaded Estonian airspace, staying over NATO territory for a full 12 minutes. This was the boldest and most provocative air violation since the start of the conflict. The Russian jets flew over Vainblue Island in the Gulf of Finland with transponders switched off and without flight plans, completely ignoring communication attempts from Italian F-35 pilots scrambled to intercept them. The incident was so serious that Estonia immediately activated NATO's Article 4, forcing an emergency meeting of the entire North Atlantic Council. This was no longer drone diplomacy. It was a direct demonstration of Russian air power testing how far NATO is willing to go to protect its smaller members. Paradoxically, while international tensions rise, Ukraine faces a complex reality of less foreign aid combined with greater internal determination. Recent reports indicate that Kyiv is preparing for a new phase of the conflict, adapting its strategies to depend less on outside support and more on domestic resources and capabilities. Ukraine is learning to fight with its own forces, becoming more resilient and self-sufficient. This transition isn't just military, but also psychological. The country has developed a more robust domestic arms industry, more advanced drone production capacities, and a better organized civil defense network. Zelensky has consistently emphasized that Ukraine isn't simply waiting for outside salvation, but actively building its self-defense capability. The most recent statements by the Ukrainian president about finding anti-air shelters on Russian territory represent a significant tactical shift. Instead of just defending itself, Kyiv is signaling its intent to take the fight into Russian territory when necessary, particularly against military infrastructure that supports attacks on Ukrainian civilians. Behind all these military and diplomatic developments, there's a much bigger geopolitical game underway. Trump's change of position on Ukrainian territorial recovery didn't happen in isolation, but as part of an American strategic reassessment of the global balance of power. The United States and its allies realized that a Russian victory in Ukraine would embolden other authoritarian regimes around the world. China is carefully watching how the West responds to Russian aggression, using these precedents to calculate its own future actions regarding Taiwan. Iran is monitoring the effectiveness of Western sanctions to adjust its own nuclear strategy. North Korea keeps testing missiles with increasing frequency, interpreting any Western weakness as an opportunity for its own military adventures. In this context, renewed support for Ukraine's territorial integrity represents more than just regional solidarity. It's a statement about the international order the United States and Europe want to preserve. Every Russian drone shot down over Poland, every Trump statement about territorial recovery, every NATO operation like Eastern Sentinel sends clear messages to other potential global aggressors. The implications of these recent developments are deep and multifaceted. First, the American shift signals to Kyiv that it can plan more ambitious operations of territorial reconquest, potentially including Crimea, a territory many analysts once considered permanently lost. The question now is no longer if Ukraine will try to recover all its territories, but when and how. Second, the Russian response suggests that Moscow is prepared to escalate its own operations significantly, potentially including more direct attacks against NATO infrastructure or allied countries. The drone incident in Polish territory may have been only the first test in a series of planned provocations. Third, the Eastern Sentinel operation represents a permanent militarization of Europe's eastern border. This is not a temporary measure, but rather a lasting reconfiguration of Europe's security architecture. Europe is effectively dividing again, this time with a technological iron curtain made of air defense systems, radar, and rapid response capabilities. The central role of drones in these recent developments shows a fundamental transformation in the nature of modern military action. These unmanned aircraft have become diplomatic tools as much as military ones, allowing countries to test limits and send messages without directly risking human lives. Russia uses drones not only for reconnaissance or tactical attacks, but as instruments of psychological and political pressure. Every drone that crosses international borders is both a military threat and a diplomatic message. For its part, NATO's ability to intercept and destroy these drones demonstrates not only technical superiority, but also political unity. The coordination among Polish, Dutch, German, and Italian forces during the Russian drone interceptions showed that the alliance can function effectively even under pressure. For Ukraine, the development of its own drone capabilities represents a democratization of military power. Small Ukrainian units can now carry out missions that previously required entire battalions, fundamentally changing the dynamics of ground conflict. We are witnessing a defining moment not only for Ukraine and Russia, but for the international order as a whole. Trump's statements about full territorial recovery, combined with the implementation of the Eastern Sentinel operation and Russia's increasingly aggressive response, have created a new geopolitical reality. Ukraine is no longer just defending itself. It is actively working to take back every inch of its sovereign territory. This transformation from defensive to offensive posture, backed by a shift in American policy and reinforced by NATO's military capabilities, may represent the biggest strategic change since the conflict began in 2022. What started as a Russian invasion aimed at conquering territory and influence quickly turned into an existential test for the post-World War II international order. Every drone intercepted, every diplomatic meeting, every public statement, all contribute to defining whether the 21st century will be dominated by regimes that respect international borders or by those who see them as mere suggestions. Ukraine's promise to recover its territories is no longer a distant hope. It is a plan in motion, supported by the largest military alliance in history and challenged by a regime that has no intention of backing down. What happens in the coming months will define not only Ukraine's future, but the very future of the idea of national sovereignty in the modern world. Since the start of Russia's invasion in 2022, Moscow has been building up experience in hybrid warfare, meaning a mix of bombings, conventional military forces, propaganda, and targeted cyber impacts. Today, its most sophisticated digital attacks are designed to paralyze Ukraine's internal functions, hitting power plants, hospital networks, and banks in an attempt to create social chaos, undermine public trust, and wear down resistance. It's a silent backstage war that goes hand in hand with artillery fire. The power sector is the most common symbolic target. In March 2024, for example, Russian rockets struck the Dnieper hydroelectric plant in the Zaporizhia region, along with thermal plants in Kharkiv and Zmyiv, triggering blackouts that left over 1 million people without power in multiple parts of Ukraine. Those physical attacks are already very public, but the cyber attacks follow a more subtle pattern. Malware built to manipulate readings, overload network controllers, or inject fake error signals into transmission lines. Analyses show that between 2022 and 2024, Russia carried out thousands of cyber incidents against Ukraine's energy infrastructure, with a nearly 70% increase in 2024 alone. Meanwhile, Ukrainian banks and financial institutions are targets of attacks meant to freeze transactions, compromise customer data, or simply stir fear in the banking system. Pro-Russian hacktivist groups like No-Name 05716 have already claimed denial-of-service offensives, DDoS, against government websites and financial entities to jam servers and cause slowness or outages. Recently, an international operation called Eastwood dismantled part of that group's infrastructure, taking down dozens of servers used in those attacks. On top of that, Russia relies on hybrid actors, cybercriminals, patriotic activists, private contractors, to keep plausible deniability and blur authorship, making sanctions or direct retaliation harder. In hospitals and healthcare systems, the damage can be literal, putting lives at risk. Imagine a hospital network whose electronic records are corrupted or whose backups are locked. Beds become inaccessible, surgeries get postponed, and patients need to be transferred. In December 2023, for instance, a wiper cyber-attack damaged systems at Kyivstar, the telecom operator, knocking out mobile and internet services for days. The impact on medical coordination and emergencies was brutal. In war cyber analysis reports, experts highlight that in many cases, hospital attacks aren't necessarily destructive, but psychological, spreading fear, disrupting care, and pressuring the government. But why this strategy? because taking down essential infrastructure causes daily life to collapse. No power, no payments, no healthcare. People start feeling the state isn't protecting them. That breeds anxiety, anger, and possibly local uprisings, exactly what an invader would want to stoke in order to weaken the government's legitimacy during war. When hotels, schools, and hospitals are operating at their limits, the internal, social resistance starts fighting a lost war on the civil side, even if the military front still holds. Still, Ukraine, with support from international organizations and Western experts, isn't a defenseless target. The country has strengthened its cyber resilience setup, going beyond just static defenses. A recent study argued that many Russian attacks failed not because Ukrainians stopped them with firewalls, but thanks to their ability to isolate, respond quickly, and recover clean backups, redundancies, in other words, through operational resilience. Meanwhile, Russia's own cyber ecosystem suffers from fragmentation, multiple groups operating under different motivations and with imperfect coordination. In short, Russia's coordinated cyber attacks are deliberate attempts to amplify both psychological and functional damage inside Ukraine. When the lights go out, bank accounts freeze, and hospitals falter, the invader tries to sow despair and internal ruin, a war of nerves effort as lethal as bombs. But even against all that, Ukraine still has the strength to resist and, as you've seen in this video, to strike back.